This is episode 28 of the Discipleship Directives with Dr. Dan Crawford. My name is Vidal, and I'm your host. Dr. Crawford is the founder and the president of DiscipleAllNations.org. Besides of the ministry that he's got worldwide, he's also a professor of the Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. Thank you for joining us this morning. And Dr. Crawford, always a pleasure to welcome you to your podcast. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Thank you.
Well,
good to be here.
Yes, sir. It's always good to have you and good to see you. And we get to skip a couple of weeks between your travels to South Texas and our weekly podcast and recording. But I'm telling you, I'm always excited to talk to you and to learn from you and to revisit some of the conversations that we had in the past and the teachings, obviously, that you bring on a weekly basis. But some of the things that have become a highlight for me also personally are our guest. And today is no exception. And I want to welcome to the podcast one of your friends and one of new friend for me because I just met her a few minutes ago. But I'm speaking of one of your former students. And Tora, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you.
It's good to have you this morning. And Dr. Crawford, I'd love for you to do a formal introduction because I know you guys go back into a couple of decades of friendship and ministry specifically. And I know we're going to touch on some of those subjects. So would you introduce our friend today?
I'd be glad to. But to introduce Tura, I have to go back a year or two before I met her. And when I met her parents, I was in my office as the director of the Baptist Student Ministries at what was then Pan American University. And this guy walks in my office and just walked in and introduced himself. And he said, "My name's Jim Hatley. I'm the new associational director of missions for what was then Magic Valley Baptist Association." And I wasn't sure about that because I had never seen a director of missions in blue jeans and boots and a plaid shirt. And I learned later when I walked him outside that he was driving a pickup truck. And then I was really confused because most directors of missions I'd known wore a tie and a suit and tie to work. But he was a working director of missions. And we became great friends and stayed great friends. In fact, he later became the director of missions for Austin Baptist Association when I was director of Baptist Student Ministries at the University of Texas. So we had several connections after those Rio Grande Valley days. But right after I met him, I met his wife, and she took over the inviting ladies from churches to come in and bring food and feed the students every Thursday. So she took a great load off my job description and did that again when they moved to Austin. But after meeting the parents, then I met Tura. She enrolled at Pan American University, got involved in Baptist student ministry, became one of our leaders. We've stayed in touch over the years. In fact, at one stretch along the way, I was her interim pastor, Hanley Baptist Church in East Fort Worth. And you always introduce me as being the president of Disciple All Nations. Well, I have a board of directors, and Tura is on it. So this is Tura Hatley Kaysen, and glad to have her on the podcast today. And I'll let her talk about her career path and memories and so forth whenever you're ready to ask her that.
Well, I'm ready to do that because, again, some of our guests for me are brand new interactions, and that's part of the excitement for me to host the podcast. And Tora, today is no exception. Just to hear that little brief, intro about parents, and that automatically brings a lot of questions into my mind. But before any questions, I'd love to hear from you. We would love to hear from you. What is going on? I mean, I know it's been a while in a sense of, just bringing that conversation from Pan American back when Dr. Crawford was the BSM director, BSU director back then. But where are we today in life? What's the Lord doing in your life today? Give us a quick update.
Okay, I'm a retired educator, and I'm a member of Broadway Baptist Church. And at Broadway, I'm on the missions committee, figure that. And I also play in the handbell choir because at Pan Am, I majored in music and went on and got my master's in music at SFA. I also work with the Agape Dinner. We serve the homeless on Thursday nights, and I help serve. Well, I have been serving, but now I have a back injury, So now I'm a table host, and I sit and visit with the gentlemen and some few ladies as they're being served dinner. And I also substitute teach.
So did you mention SFA Nacogdoches?
Yes. Got my master's at Stephen F. Austin.
Oh, that was the master's degree. Okay,
Right.
gotcha. That's the connection in there. And you mentioned the name of the church. Is that church located in the Metroplex?
It's in downtown Fort Worth, Broadway Baptist.
Downtown. Okay, wonderful. Wow. So it seems that you keep yourself busy after retirement, and which probably you are following into the steps of Dr. Crawford, which he continues to retire and then he continues to keep going. And
My parents.
Well, yeah, he is reinventing himself, and even the experience of the podcast, he knows that this is a brand new feel for him, for most of us, and yet the message remains the same. It's exactly the same message that we've been preaching for many years, and I know in both of your cases, it's exactly the same. Now, going back to the years of Pan American, you come into Pan Am, you meet him through BSU ministry back then.
Right.
Just help us to go back into those days, and what did those, I'm just picturing, because I typically speak of my kids that we're in that transition of, high school, college, grad school, and things like that. And those are such pivotal, phases of life. How is it that BSU specifically, Dr. Crawford's leadership, influence, mentorship, help you, looking back, how did you play into the role that the Lord led you and now where you are today, even ministry-wise?
BSU was just kind of expected in my household. You remember, I'm a preacher's kid, a missionary's kid. And so that was like one of the first stops after I got to college. And I lived at home and commuted while I was at Pan Am. And so that was my hangout place. I made lifelong friends there. Have many friends still from Pan Am. I was very active in the BSU. I was, let's see, Dan, I don't know if I can remember. I was on the worship committee. I was on the missions committee, and not at the same time. This is through the 4 years that I was there. I also sang in the small group. We had a small group that we did a mission trip, I guess my sophomore year during spring break. We went to the ski resorts in New Mexico and sang and witnessed there. I was involved in Beach Reach the first time. I don't know. I guess I did the first 2 years was all I helped with Beach Reach. On Friday afternoons after school, we had where was the little mission house, Dan, that Mickey lived in?
The migrant community called Lull, Lull, was just north of Edinburgh.
North of Edinburgh.
Mm-hmm.
We had a group that went there and did an after school ministry with the students there. I did that for several years. What it meant to me personally, my own growth, is even though I grew up in a Christian household and my parents were very involved in church, we were all very involved in church, really hadn't centered on a personal time with the Lord. And that's what I learned from Dan, how to pray, how to spend time with the Lord every day, and how important that was.
So you're speaking of, I guess, the expression or Christianity being crystallized, expressed,
Yes.
especially as you're transitioning into more of a maturity, adult life, that high school, college experience. Mm-hmm. I don't want to use the word autonomy because in my mind, autonomy sometimes has a negative connotation from detaching from, being accountable to people. But in this case, what I'm hearing, and again, this kind of again, taking us into your upbringing, how you were raised, I'm hearing that BSU represented a life in community. You got to enjoy serving the Lord with others for the sake of others, which typically that's what BSU comes into place. Dr. Crawford, I want to reverse the question to you. Going back into those days, and I'm assuming you remember when you first met her And back then, you are also coming into the ministry of Pan American and serving students. Help us, take us back into those experiences. What do you remember? How did that play back then, on the ministry experience working with someone like Tura?
Well, being back in the Valley these days to teach pastors and church leaders like we do once a month, just being back in the Rio Grande Valley has just brought back a flood of memories. Every time I get down there, I start thinking of other things that I'd forgotten over the years. But one of the things I'll never forget is a call that I got from, I don't know who called me. It might have been Tura's dad, but somebody called me and said, we've lined up James Robinson Crusade, Valley-wide crusade, and we can't find anywhere to have it. And we really want to have it on the campus of Pan American University in a brand new gymnasium, but we can't have it there unless the BSU sponsors it. Oh, my goodness. They're going to ask me to sponsor this thing. And that's exactly what they asked me to do. Could the BSU sponsor this Valley-wide James Robinson Crusade? Well, all I knew to say was, I'll go ask. I'll ask the president. So I did. I made a trip over to the president's office, to Dr. Schilling. And I can't tell you on this podcast the words he used, but he basically said, no, we're not going to do that. He called me several names. And I said, well, what would it take? I mean, for you to change your mind. And he used some other choice words that I won't use here. And he said, the bishop would have to approve it. Of course, Pan American University was reflective of the Rio Grande Valley. The student body was largely Hispanic and largely Catholic. And he was being ugly. And I took him at his word. So I went back to my office. I was good friends with the Catholic campus chaplain. We played golf together and all. And I called him and I said, I need to talk to the bishop. And he started laughing. He said, you can't talk to the bishop. And I said, I don't even know where he is, but give me his phone number. He said, no, what do you want? And I told him, and he said, I'll call him. So a few minutes later, I get a call back from the Catholic priest, and he says, Bishop Madero says he will call Dr. Schilling and approve it. I said, well, how did that happen? He said, well, what are they going to do? And he said, I told him they were just going to talk about Jesus. And he said, well, we're in favor of that. Well, it didn't take long till I got a call from Dr. Schilling's office, and the secretary said he would like to see you right now. So I go back to the president's office. He's got the same words that he used before. And he said, I can't do this. I said, you told me that if the bishop approved it, we could do it. And he said, I know. I said, well, did you get a call from the bishop? Yes. Well, then we're going to do it. He said, oh, and invited me to leave his office and leave him alone. But we had the crusade on campus. And I don't remember a lot of things about it, except that it was heavily attended.
Was very heavy.
A lot of decisions. I think we had nearly 200 university students that made professions of faith, public professions of faith. And it was in, as I remember, maybe April. It was right at the end of the spring semester. And there was no chance to follow up on any of those. And many of the students that went to Pan American in those days transferred out of the Valley as soon as they could. And so, we didn't get a chance to do much follow-up. But it was quite an experience. And Dr. Schilling would turn and go the other way every time he'd see me on campus. He did not want to talk to me again.
Now,
I'd like to know what Tura remembers about that.
Yeah, I was gonna ask that, but before I turn into Tura, let me just ask you, both of you guys. So the sponsorship of this massive event, and there's a question, does that imply that you had to organize all of your BSU leadership and volunteers?
Yes.
Is that part of what that sponsorship meant?
Yes.
Okay. So that's what Tura comes into place then.
Yes. Yes.
I did a lot of moving furniture, as I recall. A lot of chairs had to be placed. I was also in the choir and involved in getting other people into the choir, other students. And we weren't the only ones working. Daddy had organized church leaders who were also doing a lot of outreach, and we did a lot of outreach. And of course, we all attended. And I had it both at home and at school because Daddy was the one who called you, Dan. It was his idea. He started that. And so that was all we ever talked about, was what are we doing? Where are we? That needs to be done still. And so, yeah, it was kind of a trauma more than a blessing. I'm sorry. Once the crusade started, it was a blessing.
Well, and it's, again, because you guys obviously have many experiences like that. It is in those scenarios where, in that context, where friendships are strengthened, and definitely, you get to enjoy the commonality, in this case, of gospel presentation. And while you guys are taking me back, even, as I remember my early days, the receptivity, I guess that's the word, that people were more receptive to the gospel, except for presidents of universities, obviously, but that's a different conversation from a different day. But in this case, I mean, just the providence of God, right? Just God orchestrating things. And again, it's one of those things that, as you said, Dr. Crawford, students transfer, graduated, and only God knows how those conversions play at the end. And we come back into simply remind ourselves that we're just messengers. This is not our deal. We don't do the conversion. We're just privileged to be a part of the movement of God. Now, before we close our time today, is there anything else, Tura, that you remember that you help us to make the connection of those early days of, once again, college, transitioning, adult life, into where you are today? Because now, you just heard that Dr. Crawford comes down to the Valley on a monthly basis and teaches, trains pastor, which he's done it for many years now. But in the context of South Texas, which Pan American is a different place today, as you probably know and imagine. South Texas is different, obviously. Different. And yet the gospel is exactly the same. The message, and I'll tell you this because I get to be with Dr. Crawford and he's teaching on a monthly basis, talking to fellow pastors. And one of the things that is so attractive from Dr. Crawford on his teaching is basically how he majors in the majors when it comes to doctrine, when it comes to just gospel presentation. And for us as pastors, that's just a refreshing of our spirit in that regard. How did that play for you? How does that play for you even today as someone who continues to serve? And you mentioned the multiple areas that you keep yourself busy in serving the Lord, but how does that look like for you today?
Well, missions is a central part of my life, outreach. And so, although I don't go on mission trips anymore, I've been on to many parts of the world. I'm a firm believer in missions at home. And so I support the missions outreach of my church. I joined that church because they have many different ways that they reach out, especially to the people in the community. The zip code that the church is in is the zip code that has the highest mortality rate in North Texas. It's a very poor area. And so we reach out to those people in many ways, and I'm involved in that. It's part of my DNA to be involved and to support in any way I can.
And again, that sounds, the description you gave on missions, which is not accidental, is very purposeful, very intentional. Sounds like the perfect storm. I don't know if you guys remember that movie, Perfect Storm, of the combination of what parents did, associate director of missions in South Texas, and then Austin, right? That's what Dr. Crawford mentioned earlier.
In between, there was others, but yeah.
Yeah, but it's always that outward focus. It's always that ongoing experience. And then it comes to the BSU component. And I mean, BSU, for those who were, for many of us that we were able to be a part of BSU, is nothing else but just that, again, that very intentional focus on that. And again, that is definitely what we see today after all these years. And Dr. Crawford,
let me just say one thing. BSU built the house that my parents laid the foundation for of my spiritual life. It was what gave me the rest of the tools I needed to go through life.
Wow. That's pretty amazing, because again, although your story is quite familiar for many people, that for many of us that we had the privilege to grow up in Christian homes, which Dr. Crawford in his teachings constantly bring that point to illustrate a lot of what he is conveying to the pastors, just being a pastor's kid. And, again, a lot of those things resonate, because for some of us, Tura, the challenge is that now we're raising kids and eventually we'll be grandkids. And although we're a different generation, although, again, South Texas and the rest of Texas and the world has changed drastically and tremendously, even as we record, our podcast, we are 2 days away from the tragedy in Nashville, Tennessee, which is unthinkable. And here we find ourselves, again, going back to dealing with the same core values and core questions that every single person will ask throughout history, between the meaning of life and how to deal with the unthinkable and conceivable. And those foundations that you're describing, between home and BSU and then everything else that has taken place in your life. Dr. Crawford, thank you for the work that you've done. Thank you for the ministry that you have definitely developed throughout the years, specifically in South Texas, Pan American, once again. And today, Robert Reda, which is our BSM director. And like him, many of us, we are standing on the shoulders of those who paved the way for us. Any closing thoughts, Dr. Crawford, as we come into the time to say goodbye to our audience and specifically to our friend Tara this morning?
Well, I was only at Pan American 6 years, and a lot of guys followed me that didn't stay 6 years, and I was really proud of holding the record for longevity. And then Robert comes along. I think he's been there 18 years or 16 years or something like that.
Yeah.
And he has done a tremendous job. But Robert would be quick to tell you that those early days set the foundation and set the course for what he's been able to do there. And I'm so proud of him and supportive of him. In fact, one of the things that Tura was involved in and others, we found out he had all these interns working for him that weren't making a salary. They were just serving free. And so we just tried to raise some money among the former BSUers and ended up giving gift cards to Walmart to all of those interns. And I think it was $250 a piece or something like that, just to say, we're still a part of what you're doing, and we're proud of you, and we pray for you. And it's a different university and a different city, and they're different folks, but a lot of that's the same, as you say. I think one of the pride things of my life was when Tura and her sisters asked me to preach the funeral for their dad. And I was proud and frightened and scared that I wouldn't do a good job. I wouldn't honor him. But that was a pride thing for me to preach the funeral for her dad and then later for her mother. And am I going to preach yours, Tura?
No.
Oh, you're coming to mine. That's the way that's going to work.
As long as they did. Are you?
No, you come to mine. That's the way that'll work.
Be there.
I didn't get a chance. I don't remember meeting your dad as an associate director of the Valley Baptist Association back then. But let me finish with this note, just as a note of thanking you guys for what you have done. I came to the United States in 1990 through Valley Baptist Academy. Dr. Robert Smith was the president back then. So this is beyond the associational days for him. But it was the work through the association that I got a scholarship to begin my journey in the United States through education. The Lord has already called me to the ministry back then. I was 17 years of age. And just fast forwarding the tape, 32 years later or so, I'm able to not only interview you, Tara, today, Dr. Crawford, obviously, to sit under your leadership and your teaching, but our kids now are part of that, contextual experience. Today is Thursday. So tomorrow, my kids, all three, are traveling to Guadalajara, Central Mexico, to do a youth camp. In Mexico, they get 2 weeks of Easter vacation time. And college ministry, about 175 kids, the second largest city in Mexico. They get to share the gospel and teach the gospel over there. And it's just, I just want to remind you that this is kind of the domino effect, right? We remember those that came before us. And Tura, thank you for your parents and the ministry that they did, the impact that they did in South Texas, because again, we're standing on the shoulders of those. And thank you for your perseverance as you continue to serve and in your heart for missions. And Dr. Crawford, thank you for investing in the lives of many, many students and pastors today. I want to say thank you again for all of you guys connecting with us today. I want to remind you that if you have an opportunity to subscribe to the page, we are on social media, Dr. Dan Crawford. That's the name of the social media. Just search it, Google it, like it, subscribe, and then please help us by sharing this experience and the content of today's podcast. We will see you guys next week. Tora, God bless you. Have a wonderful day. Dr. Crawford, we'll see you next time. God bless.
Yeah.
Bye-bye. This is episode number 3 of Discipleship. This is Directives Podcast.